Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with flawed masterpieces that we love anyway. We can't help ourselves. They're just so yummy and so much fun, even with their defects. And the work we're talking about today is Richard Strauss, also sprach Zarathustra, that fabulous tone poem based on Nietzsche's book of the same title. Now, what is the problem with Also sprach Zarathustra? Of course, you all know what the problem is. The problem is it blows its biggest climax right at the beginning, and nothing that comes after leads up to it. And there's like a half an hour that comes after it. It's a problem. It's a real problem. And actually, Strauss had this problem throughout his career. He had a truly defective sense of musical timing. This is quite evident in most of his operas, where as soon as the plot is over, the singing starts. Like the best part happens when the characters just come forward and start singing, even though nothing's happening. Well, something similar happens in quite a bit of his symphonic poems. One of the issues that Strauss had in his purely orchestral works was a question of form, because he was dragging along with him throughout his life the apparatus of classical sonata form. And one of the ways he handled having to create these huge single movement works that played continuously for half an hour, 45, 50 minutes was by switching around the movement types that would have been characteristic of, for example, a symphony. That is, an opening allegro, a slow movement, a scherzo, and the sections within those pieces. So he could mix them up and have them in different orders. Zarathustra is a case in point, because the issue in virtually all of his works is, where is the development? You know, in the normal symphonic allegro, a movement, you've got like an opening theme and a second theme, then there's a development, then they come back, and then it ends, and there's a really clear narrative structure and dramatic focus to the end. Well, he kind of got rid of that without wanting to sacrifice the idea of there being some sort of developmental overarching structure. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. In this particular case, you have this stunning introduction, which presents the basic motive of the entire work. Ba, da, da. I mean, that comes back everywhere, all over the place, and it ends the whole piece, actually. And so there it is. And it's presented at the opening as a glorious sunrise, as you know, with pounding timpani, dum, bum, 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 and a huge climax with enormous chords on the organ. I mean, it's just amazing. And then it cuts off and it stops. And then the piece begins. Well, what happens? You have sort of this slow movement, very, very beautiful. Then you have a sort of quick section, which is, actually, I think my favorite part of the piece, the one that goes da ba da da ba da da ba da da, with the harps going like that. Oh, it's just marvelous, really, really marvelous, beautiful melody. It's passionate. It surges forward. I really think that's the best music in the whole work, but that's just my opinion. It's a fact that the piece has its biggest and most successful climax at the beginning. It's just not even up for debate. Then there's a whole long fugal section that finally works up to another big climax, where the thing at the beginning, with the organ, returns to end the first part, because the piece is in two parts. And it cuts off then, and it's quite unsatisfying the way it cuts off, which is good, because there's got a lot more music to come. But that's not as successful as the opening climax version. It's not as big or splashy or successful, maybe because you've already heard it once. Then you have the second part. Well, the second part is full of all kinds of really cool night sounds, cheeping and tweeting and weird gurgles and burblings from the woodwinds. It eventually turns into a waltz. A waltz, well, it's a fairly tacky sounding waltz. Yeah, da 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 da. With the solo violin, double stopping all over the place. It's kind of irritating. And it builds up to a gigantic dance, which is surmounted by the tolling of the midnight bell. as Nietzsche describes it. And it's supposed to be the climax of the whole piece, and it never comes off correctly. First of all, because it's sort of a muddle orchestrally. You know, it's da 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 ba ba da 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 whoop whoop, and then bell bong do 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 bong do 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 bong do 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 bong do 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 bong do. You know, it just does that, and it's supposed to be a big long decrescendo. The problem is, you never hear the bell. I mean, unless it's artificially recorded and someone sticks a microphone in it. Never works. You don't hear 12 tolling of the midnight bell. It doesn't strike the way it's supposed to, and it doesn't create that sense of climax that you want. And so from that point, the piece just dribbles its way to the ending, which is supposed to be enigmatic and open-ended. I mean, it is. It's polytonal. It's in two separate keys. The basses are going boom, 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 while the rest of the orchestra is in some other key going meh, like this really high up, you know. And so it's quite unsatisfying, deliberately so. I mean, it's an open-ended ending. I get it. I really, really get it. And I also think that there is a certain intelligence in operation, because how was Strauss going to top the opening? I mean, it wasn't going to end in a blaze of glory that was even more gloriously blazing than the initial blaze. So, you know, he might as well do it quietly and enigmatically, but it doesn't make it any more satisfying. I mean, really, who's he kidding? You know, you want something else, some way to have that whole second section culminate and end in a more fulfilling way. I don't accept the idea that, you know, deliberately unsatisfying and unfulfilling things are somehow basically true and or more realistic or more aesthetically legitimate, because you can suggest musically a lack of fulfillment in a very fulfilling way. Think of the ending of Mahler's Sixth Symphony, you know, the triumph of fate, the agony of, you know, of a tragic outcome. And it works fabulously well. It's quiet, it's muffled, it has its, you know, it does its thing, but the ending couldn't possibly be more final. It gives you that wonderful sense of completion. And if the message of the work is, you know, an enigma, think of the ending of Holst's The Planets. I mean, there's just lots of enigmatic or you know, insubstantial or otherwise sort of ethereal endings that are wonderfully satisfying, even while they convey the message of being either quizzical or, you know, open-ended in some way. I mean, it's always possible to do it. Strauss doesn't. That's the bottom line. And most of his large works are flawed in some sort of similar way. The tension and the climaxes are somehow unequally distributed, so that the entire result is less than satisfying. Now, again, as with all of the flaws and all of the masterpieces we've discussed, it can be played in such a way so that we don't care. I mean, when I hear Steinberg and Boston do the work, I don't care. When I hear Reiner or Kempe play these pieces, I don't care, because there's so much fabulous stuff along the way that, you know, these incidental flaws don't bother me. So I'm not saying that, you know, it's bad music, or you shouldn't listen to it, you know, or that you can't like it, or any of those things. I'm just saying we have to acknowledge that there are certain issues that great interpreters can usually, not always, but usually conceal and somehow minimize their impact. And, you know, sometimes you can't. But in this particular case, you know, the piece is so orchestrally interesting and so fabulously orchestrated and so full of interesting things along the way, that the fact that the final journey isn't such a satisfying thing when it's over, we get past it, don't we? Okay, so there you have it. Another flawed masterpiece, but we love it anyway. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me, and take care.